I made a cartoon. Here's the SEC's blind justice, but the blind justice is speaking out of both sides of her mouth. Out of one side, she poo-poos it all, saying this is just shareholders mad their stock didn't go up, some people trying to mislead the public, trying to take people's attention off their records. Out of the other side, she's saying that grandfathering provisions of Reg Show were adopted because the SEC was concerned about creating volatility where there were large pre-existing open positions, and that the failed statistics of individual firms is proprietary information, and we can't disclose that because it might make the firms that have been practicing the illegal trading strategies lose money, which would be unlawful. To paraphrase, she's saying there are no large batches of IOUs in the system, and anyone who says otherwise is just a paranoid or a nut. Out of the other side of her mouth, she's saying those large batches of FTDs that don't exist, we have to grandfather them and can't disclose their size, otherwise the volatility would disrupt the capital markets and reveal the trading strategies of the criminals who've been doing it. Well, I promised you a trip down the rabbit hole. I think we're there. There's an SEC. Here's an example. iOmega was a company that quintupled in a 3-month period back in the last decade. It wasn't that they got 5 times better in 3 months. It's widely believed that this was a short squeeze. Now consider a scarier question. What does the situation look like if there's not just shorting, but naked shorting? Remember our miscreant. Let's assume he generated millions of FTDs into the system. What does his squeeze look like? If shorting has gone on, this not just the normal borrowing and then shorting of stock, but naked shorting, been scattering these FTDs all over the system. And when the fellow goes to cover, there are more FTDs in the system than there is real stock to be bought. So as he tries to buy stock to deliver against his short, he gets in trouble. The supply and demand line shifts so far that they don't meet anymore. There is no market price. The market snaps. That's volatility. And that's what the SEC wants to avoid. Why? Remember that a lot of this money isn't in the system anymore because as the price went down, the miscreant was able to withdraw his money out of his short position. So that money's been turned into mansions and Ferraris in the Hamptons and in Greenwich, Connecticut. And in any case, perhaps enough FTDs have been issued that the squeeze would take the price far beyond where the price was when the shorting occurred, so that it will take more money to cover than was taken out of the short position. If this fellow is forced to cover, he'll use all his money covering a fraction of the failures. But he's going to run out of money before he runs out of IOUs to cover, so he's gone. The broker-dealer could be in the same situation. In fact, if a buy-in really occurs, the price could get high enough that there'd be more FTDs in the system than liquidity in the system, in which case you would see a wave of failures move through the system like this. I know that sounds crazy. Systemic failures like that don't happen, right? Well, they did with the S&Ls 15 years ago, but this couldn't happen with Wall Street, right? I believe the SEC fears it might. I believe that is exactly what they're talking about here when they say that grandfathering was adopted because the SEC was concerned about creating volatility where there were large pre-existing open positions. They are right. If the large pre-existing open positions are large enough, they darn well can create volatility, and they should be worried about that. The SEC understands that if they force the miscreants to cover those 150 million FTDs in the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ and the $500 million to $1 billion in the other exchanges, you could have exactly the situation I just depicted. And this isn't just me saying that. It's right there on the SEC website. Read it for yourself and see if you have any other interpretation of what's going on. That would also explain why they take this rather odd position saying that the failed statistics of the hedge funds is proprietary information and may reflect their illegal trading strategies. Releasing the information could be used to engage in unlawful upward manipulation of prices in order to squeeze the hedge funds properly. Note that in their worldview, information cannot be released to the public, not only because it might reveal the illegal trading strategies, but because it might make the stocks go up unlawfully. Downward manipulation is also unlawful, incidentally, but that kind of manipulation can be ignored, grandfathered, not disclosed, shielded by toothless regulations, whatever. It's not that unlawful, but a rebound would be unlawful. Now, this is a beautiful window into the mentality of the SEC and Wall Street in general. Wall Street's making money, so God's in his heaven. When the rubes out in America who actually produce things and direct their savings to Wall Street see their savings get looted and replaced with IOUs, that's something that's got to be grandfathered. But the SEC cannot release information on the IOUs because that might make the stocks rebound, which would make the hedge funds lose money, which would be unlawful. The rubes just don't understand that their place in the system is to surrender their savings to Wall Street. I'm going to conclude this presentation with one case study. To get there, I'm going to talk about Switzerland and Austria. Now, Hollywood always talks about Swiss banks as secret havens for criminals and money laundering and such. The truth is that era is over. Switzerland cleaned up its act 10 years ago, and the banking system there is transparent to the gaze of international law. Austria is a different story. There's a saying among historians that one of the ironies of history is that Hitler will be remembered as German and Beethoven as Austrian. Austria, of course, the reverse is true. So Austria gets a break. It is just not widely known that Austria emerged in the late 1990s as a prominent center for money laundering. Here is a 1996 report from the Department of State on money laundering, ranking Austria medium high. It discusses Russian organized crime groups using Austrian accounts to launder money. They attribute the problem to anonymous securities accounts. Austria had at the time anonymous bank accounts and even anonymous security accounts. 95% of the savings of Austrians were in these passbook accounts. You were supposed to be Austrian in order to get the accounts, but the banks didn't require proof of being Austrian, so anyone who could speak a little German could open an account, deposit cash and stock, and then whoever had an account passbook could withdraw it. Think that created any opportunities for money laundering? Who knew? This article from The Telegraph, a British newspaper, mentions that Austria tightened its banking laws after the U.S. named it as one of the money laundering capitals of the world because of these secretive bank accounts. They only recently froze them under international pressure. In fact, this article actually concerns North Koreans spying out of banks there using the North Korean bank's Austrian branch to camouflage raising money to fund weapons of mass destruction, etc., etc. I'm not trying to knock Austria. I don't want to get any letters from Austrians. I love the place. In my youth, I had an Austrian lady friend, and I lived there for 6 months. I loved it. My point is only that if your image of Austria is the sound of music, you're missing the fact that Austria is a pretty strange place. People don't understand how after the USSR self-destructed, Austria emerged as a kind of no man's land of international crime, especially Russian organized crime. After 9/11, things tightened up a bit. It's a pretty strange place. It's a cool place, just a little strange. So let's put a pin in that, and we'll come back to it. Sedona is a Pennsylvania company that makes customer service software for small and mid-sized companies, CRM, which is like customer service on steroids. In 2000 and 2001, its stock price collapsed. It could have been that they didn't do well, that the market didn't like them, that they weren't a good company, etc. Could have been, but it wasn't. The SEC uncovered a massive manipulation in Sedona. It ran like this. In 2001, there was a crooked hedge fund named Rhino Advisors, run by two guys, Tom and Andreas Badian. They were working on behalf of a client, AMRO. AMRO is Panamanian or Swiss, depending on what you read. It's really a big Swiss financial conglomerate with roots in the Netherlands, but this was a fund they maintained in Panama. On AMRO's behalf, Rhino told their broker-dealer to short Sedona mercilessly. That's actually on tape with their broker-dealer, a company called Revco Securities. Rhino did this as part of a death spiral convert, which was a popular financial trick a few years ago. Amarillo loaned money to Sedona. They loaned it with one hand, and then they took the money back with the other via this naked shorting technique. That's what a death spiral converter is. I won't go into it further other than to say it was a popular financial trick a few years ago. By now, you should know what this looked like. They generated all these FTDs into the system. Do we know how many FTDs got generated? We don't, because as the SEC website says, they can't release that kind of information to the public. But we know there are 85 million shares in Sedona. It's widely thought that there are 100 to 700 million FTDs generated.